Mr. Dababneh.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think as we go forward in this hearing, and I really have been very appreciative to have several opportunities to meet, especially with Airbnb folks, and I really feel like this is a really new industry, and often when we have new industries, whether a few years ago it was a ride sharing or before that other types of e-commerce issues, and we're dealing with in another committee on banking and finance with virtual currency. I feel we have to be very careful as we look to regulate before we know completely how the marketplace is going to take shape. I do feel, though, after hearing, especially from Mr. Caldwell's testimony, we have to be very careful to also look at the broader objective within the bigger economy to make sure we do have fair regulations that even out the playing field when there are discrepancies. But I just feel like one of the areas that I've been dealing with in other issues that comes up often is that we try to get ahead of the curve with regulations that really become not only overburdensome, but also become not relevant to the issues at hand as this technology develops and as it enters the marketplace. And I can tell you again, hundreds of emails and phone calls this week about this hearing from my constituents. This new type of alternative to traditional hotels is not going anywhere. We have a huge opportunity, I think, to work with everyone on this panel to make sure we do this in a way that consumers are protected, and that our constituents really feel strongly about this, that they have this option, with also protecting the marketplace. The one issue that came up overwhelmingly in the emails and the calls we were getting were from people that either were very supportive of this, but also had a few concerns on the back end. That back end being people that live in apartment buildings. They don't want to see their apartment building become a hotel, and there's obvious concerns with that. I would love to hear specifically from our panelists from Airbnb, but also if anyone else would like to chime in, some of the ways you're working with apartment owners and local governments to make sure that you're kind of getting ahead of this issue. And I know from our previous meeting you had a lot of great ideas on that, but I'd love to just hear some of the follow-up that you had to kind of give us guidance on where we should be going with that and how you guys are focused on it.
Sure. Thank you for that question, and I certainly agree. As technology moves very quickly, and government is often racing to catch up. So I appreciate those comments in terms of really understanding the interest amongst people and consumers for alternative options. And thankfully, for my colleague to the right, in cities where we have vibrant communities, hotels are doing gangbusters business as well. On the apartment question specifically, we know that landlords are a critical part of the housing ecosystem, and making sure that whatever activity is occurring is not disruptive. So we provide significant resources and education to our users on both the host and the guest side about how to be a good neighbor, about communicating with their landlords, and increasingly we're working on how we can facilitate that dialogue and work on those concerns. And if you look at the ordinances that are being passed now in cities like Portland and San Francisco, certainly we don't agree with all of the specific restrictions, but on the safety front, there are very simple and basic things like including egress maps on the back of doors if you're doing this in a multi-unit building. Most multi-unit buildings are all, under state law, are inspected. The common areas are inspected for fire safety on a regular basis. So just learning about the things that are already occurring in terms of the safety front has been very important for us. And then figuring out how do we continue to facilitate dialogue between our hosts and landlords and other people in that housing ecosystem. And we are working on, we have a neighbor hotline that we've launched in New York, although it does work coast to coast for folks who are not Airbnb users but are encountering issues with a listing or what they might suspect to be a listing that's going on in their vicinity, and are certainly open to more ideas and brainstorming, and I think have had some many productive conversations along those lines.
I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Mr. Ting, then Mr. Ting.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a couple questions, and this is for both Mr. Owen and Mr. Curtis. Do you have any data on the number or percentage of hosts that are reporting and remitting applicable TOTs at this point?
Is that specific to California?
Yes.
I wouldn't have any data on that. I could give you internal data on national surveys, about the national surveys where people are posting and answering questions that they are remitting, that these are the owners or managers who are remitting their transient occupancy tax. And the data responses are very high. These are people who are in communities where transient occupancy tax is required. And so what people are doing is they're actually posting their transient occupancy tax requirement to their advertisement on our listing, and then admitting to, that they are remitting that tax. Other people are, if they are not remitting on their own, they're going through a service that we promote heavily. It's called Hotspot Tax. It's the only resource in America, and we partner with Hotspot Tax as a service to all of our listings in the United States. They have a understanding and a catalog of all the different transient occupancy tax levels for every address around the United States. And so we promote and partner with Hotspot to get that paid. So what we're finding is we're either having it paid by the owner or the manager or through an accounting firm, most likely Hotspot.
And what's that percentage? You estimated the national percentage?
Well, the national survey was that we're getting 100% response from people that are in places that owe a transient occupancy tax, that they're either remitting it on their own or they're going through an accounting service.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gibson, then Mr. Chu.
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can be very quick.
I apologize. Mr.
No problem. I can be very quick in answering. Thank you for the question. In cities in California where we are collecting and remitting, we're doing so on 100% of the transactions that occur within that jurisdiction. Beyond that, we don't track that information, but we do similarly communicate with users. We know some of them have had issues obtaining TOT certificates in cities where that certificate is designed for traditional hotels, and so that's one issue where we speak with tax collection authorities about how they can update that information and make it more user-friendly for folks in our world.
Great, thank you. And just as a follow-up to Mr. Owen and then back to Mr. Curtis's, I know that you started remitting TOTs in San Jose and San Francisco. Any other plans for other cities up and down the state?
We have been in talks with a number of other cities. Some have been reported. We've certainly been speaking with the city of Los Angeles and San Diego and a number of other cities. For us, the tax code is different in every city. The tax rate is different in every city. Sometimes the method of calculation or collection is different. So at this point, it does require individual discussions. And we've started doing this and we're expanding the program. It initially was a pilot to see how it worked, and we are still monitoring that data and obviously expanding it as we go forward.
And for us, and this might also somewhat answer Mr. Manson's question earlier about how we educate on city regulations. What we do is we promote to all of our owners and managers in different cities where we're participating in building these policies what the new policy is. And so what we try to do in some cities is actually help them develop a very easy kind of 1, 2, 3 splash page on how to adhere to all the local regulations, and then we'll email all of our listings in that area. We've done that in various cities throughout California. Well, again, to build on what we had mentioned earlier, we're not the merchant of record, so we can't remit that taxes for the owner or manager, but we will promote that regulation, especially when we're partnering with that community to build that regulation.
Great, thank you. Last question for Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, you sort of started your statement by saying that we needed to, as governments, sort of make sure that everyone's paying their fair share. I couldn't agree more with you. What would, in your opinion, make it more fair?
Well, unfortunately, that gets me into the situation where I'm violating the chairman's rules, which is there. I mean, there's
I don't think you need to talk about legislation. You
Well,
can
I
talk
think
about
that-
ideas
I mean-
and policy and things like that.
I mean, I use the example of Healdsburg, for example. They have every city's got a different approach to it, and in the city of Healdsburg, it's prohibited. But we have the situation where it may be prohibited, but somebody from the outside, Airbnb, is still arranging for rentals in places where it's not legal. And so, at a minimum, something should be done, to help the cities enforce their own regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this committee in terms of this topic. I'm one who served local government in Southern California for 10 years, who also, because of my capacity as a city council member, ran a TOT tax in the city. Have either of your entities ever opposed a municipality from actually putting on the ballot and you oppose that TOT?
Not so far as I'm aware on our behalf.
And I'm sorry, are you asking if our company ever opposed?
That's correct.
Oh, no, sir. We actually we're again, to kind of build on something Mr. Manchin said, and might help you answer the question, we really do work with local governments, when they create that policy, even if it is something about new taxes, we will email all of our listings in that area and let them know there's a new tax that needs to be paid.
I appreciate your comment regarding working with local governments, but my colleague indicated that you entered into a lawsuit against San Francisco, so I'm not sure that's the case. How do you answer the question when it comes down to security, neighborhoods bringing in individuals, security checks? If I have an extra room at my home and I want to utilize a service, how the person that you potentially will bring to me to rent, how do I know that individual, one, is not a felon, may have a certain, it could be on Megan's Law, et cetera, pedophile, et cetera. So around security, how do you address those kinds of issues?
Sure. So the fundamental operation of our website is intended to provide our users on both sides of the equation with robust resources for evaluating the trustworthiness of one another. We have a trust and safety team as well, over now I think 150 folks, which is a significant part of our company's workforce, who are constantly monitoring the platform for any number. We are a global company, so there are certain requirements that apply as we process payments. So, making sure that there aren't financial fraud issues occurring, everything from that to responding to trust and safety issues that might arise as they do occasionally. So we are extremely focused on safety, and the platform is designed so that if you are a host, you can look at the reviews of your guest or you can communicate with them. And if you're uncomfortable with inviting somebody into your home, the vast majority of our hosts are sharing the home in which they live. They have a very strong incentive to take the necessary measures, ask the right questions to ensure that what they're doing is safe. And similarly, because the overwhelming majority of folks are sharing their primary residence, they have an interest in making sure that it is safe and they are not inviting sort of strangers who might cause mischief into their home. And if there are issues that arise, that user would get a bad review and would probably have a very difficult time accessing the platform in the future.
Well, I appreciate your response, but let me go a little further. It's my home, bringing someone in. I don't have the capacity or the ability to do a background investigation whether or not that person has broken laws against children. I have a child in my home. I have an extra room. How am I, the host, going to do a background check on the person and making sure that person is safe for me to even have in my home as well as around my child?
Yeah, the best, and I'm more than happy to arrange this, the best explanation that I could give is connecting you with hosts in your community who doubtless have children and are hosting folks in their homes. And they are very aware of how to ask all of the right questions and to engage in using the resources and tools that we build into the platform in order to address those questions. And we are, as a company, constantly monitoring the platform in a variety of ways, some of which we talk about and some of which we don't talk about, but to ensure that we're doing what we can as a company to protect our community.
Okay, Mr. Curtis?
Do you want me to start with the first question?
Sure.
Can you repeat that, please?
I forgot it. What was it?
Just to address safety.
The safety issue.
So
yes.
Similar to Airbnb, we have a trust and safety team that's working around the clock and at an international level. We, of course, do also review on or lean on the reviews and the open dialogue between the owners and the travelers. But I think the one key factor probably is to look at the data. And the data doesn't support that there has been issues, since we are dealing with folks that are the owners of the property or the managers of these owned properties, and they tend to be higher-end vacation level properties. You don't see this in the news. So we've been around for 11 years. Our oldest label is 40 years old. We don't have news like that. But a lot of it comes down to the training and education, and we work very diligently on conferences and summits with our owners and managers around the country and providing them a variety of resources so that they can get ahead of this so that it's never an issue. And it never has been.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chu.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple comments based on the very good questions asked by our colleagues. And first, just note that many of the questions that our colleagues have asked were the exact questions that we grappled with in San Francisco over the last couple of years. I want to first associate myself with some of the comments of Mr. Dababneh. Certainly, I think we all agree there are issues that we need to address, but certainly we also know that these are 21st century developments that are helping in our city thousands of residents be able to afford in our increasingly expensive cities and throughout the state, hundreds of thousands of Californians that are able to pay the rent and make the mortgage because of this. And so I think as we think about it, we need to balance those interests. Both Mr. Dababneh, who asked questions around apartment building issues, and Mr. Gibson, who asked questions around security issues, these were issues that we had to grapple with in San Francisco, and I'll just mention a number of things that we did in our local ordinance to address this. First of all, we required every host who engage in this activity to comply with all local codes, and obviously that differs depending on where we live, but that was a very strict set of requirements. We also require every host to register with our locality, so we know who they are. If there are issues that arise around safety, we can go after them. If some particular host happens to be famous in the neighborhood for throwing a few too many parties, we can, as a city, go down and shut that down. And then, as I mentioned before, San Francisco established an insurance requirement in case there were any financial obligations that came about through any bad acts that occurred through this activity. Mr. Chow referenced a recent report that suggested in Los Angeles there are thousands of units that are being rented out not by the residents who live in them, but some other party. And this is a practice that, frankly, from my perspective, is not one that I wanted to support. In San Francisco, we established a requirement that you needed to be a permanent resident. You needed to actually live in the unit in which you were renting to engage in this activity. That was really a cornerstone of our law. And I just want to note that HomeAway, in their lawsuit, challenged that very aspect. They took the position that anyone ought to be able to rent out any building, any room to do this. I happen to think that if we're talking about shareable housing and the shareable economy, you need to actually be sharing the asset, the place you live in. So just wanted to make those points. But again, I want to thank our colleagues for their really good questions as well as the panel for their answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Mullen.
Thank you to both chairs for hosting the hearing. Thank you all for the testimony. I hail from San Mateo County. As a former mayor and council member, TOT is near and dear to my heart. But coming from the Bay Area, so is the innovation economy and the innovation that Airbnb, for example, brings to our region. If I had $1 for every time I utter the phrase innovation economy, I'd be a wealthy individual. But so my question is, as I understand it, and I apologize, I've been bouncing back and forth between hearings here and trying to come up to speed. My colleagues Ting and Mr. Chu have been dealing with this issue for years. Trying to understand being in the shadow of the big city of San Francisco. So Airbnb has a deal with San Francisco and San Jose on TOT. But how would a community like San Mateo County, for example, deal with this issue? And is the preference to look at a statewide policy framework, or is the preference to deal city by city and try to educate cities, try to educate, all parties in the transaction? Sort of, I just want to kind of get a sense of where the policy conversation is moving. Is it piecemeal or is it wholesale?
Sure. At this point, I would say it's piecemeal. We began, the very first city that we were collecting and remitting on behalf of our users was Portland. That was July of last year. So we've now added a large number of cities, or maybe a handful of cities, and the country of France to that roster. So it is increasing. As to the question of a statewide solution, I think that probably raises a whole number of questions that maybe be the topic of a separate hearing. Certainly something that we have thought about. I think there are some fundamental policy questions, including ensuring that the tax is being applied evenly across the activity and across the marketplace. But at this point, our approach is engaging with individual cities and discussing voluntary collection agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Mr. Breaux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important meeting. I think I would just offer an observation. I served on the Dana Point City Council. We're very reliant on TOT. It's a third of our budget. We have some properties, the St. Regis, the Ritz-Carlton, Marriott, and like other colleagues said, it funds our police and fire. We grappled with this issue for 7 years. There were some on our council that wanted to ban vacation rentals outright. And we have been a vacation rental community since the 50s. But our ordinance did not allow them. So the council debated for 7 years whether our community should have them or should not have them. So we ended up drafting an ordinance. We came down on the belief that people should be able to do what they want with their private property. Most folks who are in this business did not have a problem paying the TOT. It was the regulatory burdens that were most concerning to them. You have an area of our town, Beach Road. The houses are from the 50s. They didn't want the city coming in and inspecting and needing to get up to Title 24 requirements and costing a lot of money to fix up their houses. Now, we did have an inspection for safety, smoke detectors, escape routes, fire extinguishers, things to that. But part of our ordinance was we allowed homeowners association, CC&Rs, to govern. If you banned them, then you couldn't have them. If you allowed them, you allowed them. So as we go down this road, I have a little bit of experience with this, being on city council. So if we can keep the dialogue going, and if you could offer some suggestions to us, what you're seeing in other areas, I think we can find a solution. Thank you very much.